On today's show, a new study claims that you are twice as likely to die in the next decade if you can't do this. A trio of stories reveals that the Nanny state is alive and well in Canada. And finally, we conclude our series on transgender ideology as we dive into the dark world of conversion therapy. Or is it? This is Penhold Talk Radio. And welcome back to the show. Thank you for joining us again this week. My name is still Brian Constantine. I am here with my co-host, Michael Rowland.
Hello, hello.
And let me start off with a question this week. If I could tell you you were going to die in the next decade, would you want to know?
Ooh.
It's a plot to like a good movie or something like that, I'm sure.
A decade's still a pretty good span of time.
That's right.
So I think that'd be okay. You're not giving me a specific deadline. I think I'd like to know if I'm going to live.
At least a general decade?
Yeah, I think.
But yeah, you wouldn't want to know like specific day. Or
No,
it's too specific.
No, never want to know the specific day you're going to die. That's just too much.
Okay. All right. So I'll tell you how and I'll leave the choice up to you. If you want to know if you're going to die, or at least a pretty good chance you'll die in the next decade. Here's the article from the Times out of London. It says, from a study, it says people who can stand on one leg for 10 seconds are almost twice as likely to die within the next decade, according to a study.
So I'm supposed to stand up now and see if I can stand on one foot?
Yeah. And I can now picture most of our audience now standing up and trying to do this. Now, the study does give you 3 chances to do this. So in this study, they asked 1,702 middle-aged people to stand on one leg for 10 seconds, placing the front of their free leg against the back of the leg that was touching the ground, and up to three attempts to hold that position for 10 seconds were allowed.
So you don't get to flail your other leg around to try to catch your balance?
I guess not. No, yeah, it's really gonna try to test your core balance.
Yeah.
Now, this test, I think, they did it for the ages of between, I think it was like somewhere around the 50 to 75 range. So middle-aged, as I said, middle-aged people. So that seems like, again, a little older. But anyways, middle-aged people. I'm still a while before I get there. So it says, once age, sex, and underlying conditions were taken into account, failing the test was linked to an 84% increased risk of dying within 10 years.
I really want to know who comes up with this test. Like, is there really just some doctor or scientist sitting there? We need to come up with something we could try. Let's try standing on one leg.
Yeah, they're just bored.
See if it works. We're going to have to do it over a pretty long length of time. Somebody's going to have to fund this.
No, right.
Does nobody look at this and say this is not worth funding?
I think this was, I think the study was out of, or at least had some connections to a Brazilian university. And it might have been connected to a previous study related to certain exercises or abilities. And so they just piggybacked on that and said, okay, well, it's been 10 years. Let's see how these guys are doing. Of those people who couldn't do it, almost twice of them, many of them are dead now versus, this is kind of interesting. So now the researchers are recommending that this simple and safe balance test should be used in your GP, used in GP clinics during routine health checks for older adults to pinpoint those with shorter life expectancy. Now, the study, as far as I was reading the articles, doesn't say, why necessarily a lack of balance indicates you might die, or an increased chance you'll die in the next decade. Because there's, some of it is related to balance issues related to your mental capacity, or is it, your physical already, you're kind of on physical decline? Is it indicated just the fact you'll fall more likely when you're older? So it doesn't actually tie it to any particular form of death in the next 10 years. So
yeah, that's really vague. I could see the connection to the physical. Generally, if you're in better physical condition, your core is going to be stronger and you're going to be more capable of balance. Yeah. So I suppose there'd be a connection there. But yeah, it's a pretty vague result from the study.
Yeah. So yeah, it's you can't tie this to anything else. It's just whether or not you can balance for 10 seconds within 3 attempts. And if you can't, you'll have an 84% chance that, or increased chance that you'll die in the next 10 years. So
if you're getting a little up there in age, that middle age and older, start trying to stand on one leg, see how you do.
Yeah.
And if you really don't want to know, don't try it.
Don't do this. Yeah. So like I said, this is now I've put this in your hands or your feet, whatever. It's up to you to determine whether or not you how long you have left. Yeah. But there is a simple way for you to find out. All right. Now there's so many articles this week that I found interesting worth going through, but there's 3 more that I want to kind of pick on, and I kind of grouped them under this nanny state category of stories. And the first one comes from CBC, though obviously it was reported everywhere, that the federal government announced a ban on plastics, from plastic bags to takeout carriers to plastic straws, stir sticks, cutlery, 6-pack rings that are used to hold cans and bottles together. All of those are going to be phased out in either manufacturing, selling, and also importing or exporting. So the article says that that the federal government is banning companies from importing or making plastic bags and takeout containers by the end of this year, from selling them by the end of next year, and from exporting them by the end of 2025.
So I'm just seeing a great black market here for straws, because
right.
If you've ever used a paper straw, you know that it's not a viable alternative.
No.
So I can just see a phenomenal opportunity for a black market straw dealer.
Yeah, we'll get to another article, but maybe they'll have to like special labels on straws on each individual straw. This isn't like an official straw or an illegal straw or something like that. Now they are allowing some exceptions for plastic straws, say for those who need them for medical reasons, have difficulty drinking. So you'll still have your bendy straw for that, but just think about by the end of 2025, you won't be able to go on Amazon and order or even down to Walmart and pick up your package of straws, plastic straws. Because I haven't come across too many places. I think there's one, I just can't remember the name, that has, at least on it, had that labels it biodegradable straw, and it's still plastic on the inside, or at least it has the plastic look to it. Now, no, I'm not sure if they were just referring to the packaging around it that's biodegradable and they're just letting you assume that's the straw. But yeah, I haven't come across any good paper paper straws. Cineplex certainly has not mastered the 2-hour paper straw yet.
No, a few of the fast food places, their paper straws will last you 5 minutes, 10 minutes before they start getting soft. Yeah. So if you just run it down that root beer really fast, your A&W paper straw might survive.
Yeah.
But yeah, you grab your pop at Cineplex and want to go watch a movie. Don't stick that straw in your drink until you are ready to just drink it, because it's not going to make it to the end.
Yeah. Now, so the later in the article, there's a Sarah King, she's the head of the Oceans and Plastics campaign for Greenpeace Canada, said banning the 6 items is a step forward, but disagrees with Guibault's claim that it shows Canada is all in on ending plastics. And King said that the 6 items, so this is again refers to plastic bags, single-use straws, let me start counting, stir sticks, cutlery, 6-pack rings, and takeout containers. So those are the 6 things. They only amount for 5% of the plastic waste in Canada. So it's already not a lot to begin with. The article also mentions France has banned most of these items that Canada is going to. And it also mentions that it's banned the free plastic toys handed out to kids with fast food meals.
See, that would make more sense to me, because talk about plastic waste. The McDonald's toy is the most wasteful piece of garbage you'll ever buy or ever accumulate in your home.
Yeah. I can understand. Yeah, I think a lot of parents are like, finally.
Yes.
Like, I can finally get rid of that collect all bin I have downstairs with all the
Yeah.
McDonald's toys. Yeah. So yeah, we're heading in that direction. It would likely be just a little bit of context. I did a little bit of background on this just to see again how much difference this would make. Especially now, this is particularly related to the plastic bag issues that a lot of stores have already kind of preempted the government on this.
Yeah.
And so now, we're supposed to feel all good when we walk into the store with our new reusable plastic or cloth or cotton bags. But I came across a study from the British government in 2006 that kind of compared the environmental impacts of the traditional plastic bag with all these other reusable bags that are being promoted. And it's not, you have to use these quite a bit, at least in some cases. So in order to see the environmental impact improve over just one plastic bag being used one time, a paper bag would have to be used 3 times. Those kind of hard or the kind of sturdy plastic reusable bags, those ones you would have to reuse 4 times. The cloth bags that are not cotton, you have to reuse them 11 times to get the benefits, to get on the positive side of the environmental ledger, as it were. You have to use them 11 times to see a benefit over the use of one plastic bag one time. And then over a cotton bag. So this is what you would think of like maybe like a book bag or something like that. You have to use a cotton bag 131 times to get a better environmental impact than one plastic bag used once.
Yeah.
So, the 3, 4, and 11, you can probably do that. But remember, I don't know about you, but my closet has a spot for all those plastic bags to go after the grocery trip because I know I'm going to reuse them.
Yeah.
So now all those numbers I just gave you, they just multiply by every time you reuse one of the plastic bags.
Yeah. And how many of us use a plastic grocery bag for things like a garbage bag? For a small garbage, you use a plastic bag. Or when you have to take something with you somewhere or give somebody something, or you're just constantly reusing these things all over the place.
Yep.
And the crazy thing about a lot of it is if you're using it as a garbage bag and you no longer have that as an option, you are now going to the store to buy plastic bags to use as a garbage bag that are, I'm assuming, I don't know the details of how those are made, but I'm assuming they're just as bad for the environment as the grocery plastic bags.
Yeah. Is it, it'd be just as bad, which is not really as bad as I think a lot of people might think these are. As I read it out, you have to reuse these bags multiple times. And as we were talking before the show, how many times do you forget to bring in your reusable bags into the store? And what do you end up doing? You probably just end up buying a new reusable bag anyways.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm at the dozens of reusable bags now because I'll stop on the way home from work unexpectedly.
Yeah.
Before coming home from work, you realize, oh shoot, I should stop at the store. I didn't stick bags in my car, so I guess I'll just buy another one because I don't like using the paper bags. They're really awkward.
Yep. Yeah, especially the paper bags. Now, this is a quote from the Columbia Climate School. It says, life cycle studies done in Europe and North America have determined that overall plastic bags are better for the environment than paper or reusable bags unless the latter are used many times. So those are the basically kind of stating the facts I just gave you. Most, however, do not consider the problem of litter, which we know is a major drawback of plastic bags. And this is, and so you're not necessarily going to be improving the greenhouse gases that many times are being touted when these nanny state restrictions come in. It's more about all the litter, the fact that plastic takes a while to biodegrade. or break down. And even when it does, it's still these little microplastics, which is now the new buzzword going around.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, that's, to me, this is I think a clear example of a nanny state situation. The other quick little note before we move on to the next one is that this new regulation coming in doesn't sometimes doesn't go far enough, because what some pop manufacturers are doing, they're taking the six can ring, removing that, and just wrapping plastic around the outside of their of their six packs.
Yeah.
And so they're just using more plastic, or using plastic in a different way that's not banned.
Yeah.
So this is just going to be a chase the plastic campaign going forward over and over and over again. It's going to just keep going as the manufacturers go with one thing that seems to be bad for the environment. According to the government, they'll just have to ban those. All right. So nanny state story number 2 has to do with cigarettes. And so about 20 years ago, this article from CTV says that Canada was kind of set the international trend when it comes to putting graphic images on the cigarette containers.
Yeah, I remember that through most of my life now. Every time you see a tossed out cigarette package on the ground with some disgusting picture of a bad lung or somebody's throat or something like that.
Yeah. We've all walked by that garbage. But apparently the Canadian government wants to set another trend, So the article says that Canada is poised to become the first country in the world to require that a warning be printed on every cigarette. The move builds on Canada's mandate to include graphic photo warnings on tobacco products packaging, a groundbreaking policy that started an international trend when it was introduced 2 decades ago, as I mentioned. And so they're saying that they're hoping that put these changes into force in the latter half of 2023. And the article also says that while exact messaging printed on cigarettes would change or could change, Bennett, the government official, said that the current proposal is, quote, poison in every puff. The government now wants to use our tax dollars to enforce regulation to put messages on every single cigarette in Canada.
What's the objective here? I think for the last, what are we at? Probably about 50, 60 years, we've done a pretty good job of making people realize that cigarettes aren't good for you.
Yeah.
We all know that.
Yeah, I think that message has been received.
Yeah. So what are they trying to accomplish? And cigarettes aren't sold individually.
No,
you're sold in a package that has a graphic warning already printed on it.
Yeah. So you have, as far as I understand, you'll have the graphic image on the outside plus their little pithy phrase on the inside. Because as you've opened your carton, you've looked at the image. You've opened it up and said, no, I don't care about that image. And then you've pulled your cigarette out and now it says poison every puff. And he's like, oh, shoot, yes.
That makes you start thinking a little deeper about it.
Yes. That's got to be right.
The message is out there. Just let people make their decision now.
I know. Like, that's the thing. The message has been sent. And I think at this point, at what point does the government say, okay, enough is enough. We'll let people make their own decision.
Yeah, basically
the whole nanny state thing.
Yeah, at this point, the only reasonable options, if you can call them both reasonable, is that let people make their decision or fully ban cigarettes. If you really think they're that horrible that you have to have a message on every single one about how bad it is, then just ban it. Just get rid of it. If that's the way you feel about it, then that's the direction you have to go, or you have to back off and let people make a decision for themselves.
Yeah. That's what's the next step after this? Like 20 years from now, what are you going to do when you haven't hit your marks yet?
Yeah.
Because here, and then the article says that smoking rates have been steadily falling over the years. The latest data from Statistics Canada released last month shows 10% of Canadians reported smoking regularly. The government is seeking to cut that rate in half by 2035. StatCan noted that roughly 11% of Canadians 20 and older reported being current smokers compared to just 4% of people aged 15 to 19. And so, their smoking rates are falling. So it's working.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can attribute it to graphic images on cartons, but and then they've also hidden them behind the cashier. They've blocked the viewing of it for
that's just a few years ago when they made it so you couldn't even have them visible.
Yep. Now, and I do want to point out one kind of odd contradictions, as again we mentioned earlier before the show. This is the same federal government who allowed Vancouver now to bypass, or to allow people in Vancouver, I think it is, to have personal amounts of certain hard drugs on them, cocaine or heroin. I can't remember. But
we're decriminalizing hard drugs that do serious damage.
Yep.
While we are trying to push for tobacco to be outcast and taken away from society.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say, I will never argue that smoking is good.
No.
It's bad for your health. It's disgusting. I don't like it.
Yep.
But how can you ban that or move in the direction of banning and trying to push it away while saying we're going to let people have their heroin and cocaine?
I don't understand the rationale behind that. Like if this is really about mental health or about physical health, public health,
yeah,
you've crossed your own lines here. This is about stopping people from smoking, and yet you're going to decriminalize hard drugs for personal amounts.
Yeah.
I fail to see how those are in congruence with each other. But anyways, that's the nanny state for you. The third nanny state story comes from Health Canada again. So we got a little bit of theme here. We got environmental health, and then we got public health, and I guess this kind of fits into the public health again. Yep. Health Canada says a front of package nutrition label will soon be required on foods that contain 15% of your recommended daily intake of sodium, sugars, and saturated fats.
If you've ever eaten any snack food, 15% of your sodium and sugars is not very high.
No.
One single chocolate bar will exceed actually in most cases will exceed your entire daily recommended amount of sugar. So every snack food is going to be getting some sort of label, whatever this is.
It would seem, but that's where this really seems to be causing some consternation is with beef and cattle farmers, I should say.
Saturated fat.
Yeah. So this says that there are, let's see here. It's the fact that this front of package labeling will be required on ground beef, but not on, say, raw whole cuts of beef or of meat. So it's ground meats, it says, which are high in saturated fats are not exempt, and it's left some within the meat industry scratching their head. So oftentimes single ingredient products are exempt from certain nutrition labels.
So beef is exempt from that because it's not ingredients, it's just beef.
Yeah. So your fruits and vegetables, oftentimes, even canola oil gets an exemption, which is kind of interesting. It will actually be exempt from this labeling. But okay. But oftentimes the labels, at least from the government standpoint, is they're trying to make it, try to affect your consumption habits,
yeah,
as well as change the say processing or the manufacturing of some of these foods. And so a lot of the nutrition labels I think are helpful when you're looking at all of the different processed foods. You kind of nice to know what's in there.
Yep.
But the problem here is that we're dealing with a single product or a single ingredient product, and so There is, let's see here, finding. So there's a professor of food distribution at Dalhousie, Sylvain Charbot. She said, Charbot in the article quotes says that Charbot recognizes that these labels can be a motivating factor for industry to innovate, forcing companies making highly processed foods to research and make better products that wouldn't have too much sodium, fats, and sugar. But then it goes on to say, I think this is a quote from her, but what do we do, or what do you do with ground beef? What do you do with ground pork? There's nothing else you can do. It's just a natural single ingredient product.
Yeah.
And so, the cattle farmer is like, why are you picking on us? Like, no other single ingredient product is going to have to be required for this.
Not to throw conspiracy theory out there, but how much is this to push for the whole alternative meat markets of things like your Beyond Beef or Beyond Meats and all those artificially manufactured meat products that would then be capable of not having to do these labels. They would be able to produce it in such a way that it has lower than that 15%, and they can produce an alternative.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know why. I don't know why the government would want that, but that's the way our society has been shifting. Like when you have places like A&W advertising more for their non-meat burger than their meat burgers.
Yeah.
It's pretty clear that culturally people want, or at least enough people want to see these meat alternatives. And that would be one way that this, forcing this onto ground beef would actually have an impact on the markets and on what's available and on manufacturing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know what else to remark on these. It's just each one of these. So every government action in some way is a behavioral, is trying to force some sort of behavioral change or adjustment. Yeah. So when you're talking about that, then perhaps that's maybe one element of it. And who knows. But each of these, I think, is a clear example of the government stepping in where perhaps it doesn't need to. Now, I think for me, I wonder where that line is sometimes. Like sometimes, I advocated against the introduction of the pot shop here in town.
Yeah.
Was that requiring too much of a nanny state involvement in what kind of businesses go on in here?
Right.
And some people will no doubt say, yeah, of course it is. But nonetheless, I think these are examples, clear examples of things that are too far. Like there's this government meddling in things that just leave it alone. This is let the market sort itself out in many of these cases.
But when it comes to these health things, that's where in a system where we've got public health care, they feel obligated to try to make a healthier population. And so you'll have like that. Everything we have has nutrition labels on it because you need people to be aware of whether or not what they're consuming is healthy. We can't outright ban everything, but we can try to manipulate the people into living a healthier life, which will reduce our healthcare costs.
Yeah.
And so by having things like public health, you're putting the government in a position where they feel like in order to keep costs as low as possible, we have to invade other areas that affect health.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. When that's I think an overlooked consequence of the public healthcare system is that now you've put the government in charge of health everywhere, because now it's public funds that go into everyone else's healthcare. It's not your money. So you aren't paying directly for your own healthcare consequences or the food you eat.
Yeah. It takes the responsibility off the individual. When you are paying your healthcare costs, then everything you eat, everything you drink, everything you smoke affects you.
Yep.
And not the public healthcare system where it's just kind of a joint pool of funds.
Yeah. And so that's definitely one element of it. But I think I don't know. Like I said, the government has a place, but I don't know if these are where it should be. This is this. Okay, so yeah, this is the thought. So the government just, instead of letting the market dictate it, and then, like I think you can let the market run itself in so many different areas that the government just could back out. Um, like just for example, you know, if the government stopped requiring nutrition labels, how many companies are going to take them off? Probably not a lot, because consumers now want them.
Yeah, people have
Or
become
you know,
accustomed.
yeah, like or when when we're looking at plastic bags, so many big markets and chains have already adopted or got rid of plastic bags. Why?
And a lot were going that direction well before the government was even talking about the
Yeah.
plastic ban. So it's the market, the free market, doing what they think the people want to see.
Yeah, and I think it's important to let that play out.
Yeah.
That's more reflection on what the quote people want than what the government wants.
Yeah.
And the smaller the less government we get involved, I think it less less manipulation is going to
Yeah.
result. I think a lot of people want the government to step in because they can speed things up. But I think in many cases, I think we can all point to more examples of situations which, if the government didn't get involved, things would be better
Yeah.
in so many different areas of life. And so I think I think these three stories indicate, I think, areas where the government perhaps is perhaps not out of sync with where a lot of people are for things. Like, people might want to know more nutrition facts about their food. Okay, I'm not sure how many people are looking for pictures on their cigarettes, but okay, whatever.
But looking at the lower numbers of smokers now, there's a lot of the population that wants it gone.
I get
So-
who's lobbying for that?
No, I don't know.
It's already one of the most taxed, regulated industries, and
That has no advertising. Like you basically,
yeah, you can't advertise it in Canada.
it's only existent because of its addictive nature.
Yeah.
If it wasn't addictive, it would have died off a long time ago.
Probably a good
probably.
chance of it. But yeah, it's just I would like to see the government back off and let kind of the market and the people run the show, as it were.
Yeah.
Like, the government is there for guardrails and referees more than anything else.
Yeah.
They're not meant to be players in the game as much
Yeah.
as possible. I think I like that analogy. So yeah, this is them stepping too much into the field of play. All right. On to the show's big idea. And if you've been following the last few episodes, save for last week, June being Pride Month, we decided to take a look at one element of the LGBT alphabet, and the T part. I shortened it up because I can't get all the letters and I can't remember the order.
It depends who you talk to.
This is true.
It varies quite a lot.
Even the U.S. president couldn't get it straight this last week. So
It almost always starts with the LGBT, and then after that,
yeah,
everybody's got a different set.
yeah, and it grows each year. But we're looking at the T. We're looking at the transgender, and particularly the kind of the transgender ideology. How do we get to? We're at a point in society now where men can proclaim to be women, and everyone has to go along with it, essentially. So how did we get to that point? And so we've looked at kind of the history of some of this thinking from kind of early stages of feminism, and how that kind of became distorted. Where feminists were fighting for rights, equal rights, to being fighting for equal roles with men, to being completely equal in everything they do. And this kind of ended up separating or causing a distinction between sex and gender. Sex being kind of the biological capacities, and gender being kind of these social constructs and social expectations. And so in these kind of later stages of feminism, the biology was viewed as an oppressive thing to the social gender construct. So
Yeah.
you being or a woman being able to give birth was actually a bad thing. It was an oppressive thing to them being, quote, equal with men.
Yeah.
And so that kind of We looked through that history. We looked at Dr. Money out of John Hopkins in the 1960s, and the terrible twin study that he performed, and how that kind of brought into the lexicon these ideas of gender identity, sexual orientation, and even just the word gender being used in this kind of social construct context, as opposed to simply a grammatical or linguistic term.
Yep.
And then a couple of weeks ago, we went through kind of the biology, the whole X and the Y's that you would normally get taught in high school biology class. And yet we see that biology being trumped with this language of assigning sex at birth, and how we assign it only because we want to make it provisional to one's perception of themselves later on as male or female.
Yeah.
And so gender now becomes the trump over biological reality. So if you think you're male, you are male. But then that obviously raises the question, if your thinking makes you male, then what does it mean to have a male body? Well, wouldn't it just be the fact that you are male in that body? But no, of course not. It's much more confusing than that. And so we looked at the gender affirming treatment that kind of goes along now with this affirmation that gender is the priority over all other things. And so we looked at this gender affirming treatment going through social transition, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and then finally, quote, gender affirming surgery. And this being the only option now.
Yeah. We've basically outlawed any other path. If somebody decides that they are transgender, this is the option. This is the one and only option.
Yeah. If you go to a therapist with the issues of gender dysphoria, not feeling comfortable or connected with your body, feeling like you're not in the right body, the only thing that the psychologist or the psychiatrist can do is recommend that you go through this gender affirming treatment. Yeah. That's the only treatment path that you have now. Because just at the end of last year, December, Canada passed a conversion therapy ban. At least that's what it's kind of commonly known as.
Yeah.
And what this conversion therapy ban is it's actually just banning the conversion of one's gender identity to align with their biological reality.
Yeah.
So it's banning the conversion of your mental state to match your physical state, but it doesn't ban you converting your physical state to match your physical state or your mental state.
Yeah.
So it's only a one-way conversion ban.
And the way it's explicitly laid out, it only bans going from one of these oppressed categories back to what they keep terming as cisgender, not the other way. Not that that's a common thing, but it explicitly just only allows or doesn't allow the one direction.
Yep.
If somebody is physically male, identifies as female, you can't try to change their thought process, their mind, but you can if they're cisgender male,
yes,
and decide they want to be or want to lean the other direction and go towards female.
Yeah.
Like the whole thing just it's a very biased law.
Yeah. Yes. I guess biased. It's certainly reflects a certain worldview of reality, and it goes back to some of those thinkings of feminism and Dr. Money and those that come after him. And maybe in later episodes we'll dive even further into some of the changes in culture too. How did we get to that point where a statement like "I am a man trapped in a woman's body" makes coherent sense to someone today? Like someone says that, and we understand we're expected to treat that as a coherent statement. But 30 years ago,
you go far back, and it's a goofy sci-fi movie.
Yeah,
that's
it's
all
a comedy or something.
Yeah, it's something absurd. It's so ridiculous that it's comedic.
Yeah. I just watched Mrs. Doubtfire, and part of the comedy on that is the fact that it's a man dressing up as a woman. That's the funny part. But
Yeah,
today it would be
today's-
considered it's a serious thing.
Yeah. In today's world, that would almost be a drama, not a comedy.
Yeah. So what we want to do on this episode is look at this band. Look at this the band treatment, this scary conversion therapy, and try to unpack that a little bit and try to clear up what is and what is not, and then hopefully we can have a more serious conversation about this going forward. Now, I think when most people hear the word conversion therapy today, they either have one of two kind of thoughts come through their mind. First, they either think something like electroshock therapy out of like the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, or they think like religious exorcism kind of process.
And I think that's probably the most common. Like people will always kind of remember the extremes of the electroshock kind of treatments, but I think media has pushed the idea of the extremist religion things, like the person getting dragged kicking and screaming or tricked into going to this thing where they're tried to religiously change their ways, their evil ways. And I know a lot of TV shows like to do that. They'll have the gay character that winds up in this church where the pastor screaming in his face kind of thing. Yeah.
There's definitely been documentaries focused on that. And this is not to say that there aren't a number of religious organizations that kind of are in various ways and with various aggression, in various, let's see how to phrase it, with various aggressive ways of doing this or not.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the best way, but so this is not to say that those aren't out there. But I think once we get to the end here, you'll see that in most cases, especially when this is done from kind of a psychological perspective, treatment wise, it's far from what most I think most people in culture are thinking of when they think conversion therapy.
Yeah.
So just a quick kind of history through this. It was around the turn of the 20th century that doctors and psychiatrists began to see homosexuality as a medical issue. Now, for much of the West, kind of as the Christian heritage and culture kind of permeated the West, homosexuality was treated as a moral issue. It was kind of an unnatural, sinful behavior that did not enjoy, that you just did not come out and talk about in public. Yeah. So it already had that kind of stigma in it, but it was, I think it was viewed more as a moral issue. What we see coming in around the beginning of the 20th century is it being treated as a medical issue.
Yeah.
Which is it's a shift that needs to be recognized. And I think Sigmund Freud had a good amount to do with this. He started really emphasizing the primacy of sexuality in the human being. Like even from birth, we are sexual beings, according to Sigmund Freud, and that kind of thinking really became ingrained in the culture. Even now, look at what now today is like. You want to know why homosexuality is so tied to your identity. You can look back to Freud as being a key factor,
right,
as opposed to sex being something you just did. Now your sexuality is who you are. That's an important shift that goes on, and part of that is can be chalked up to Sigmund Freud around the turn of the century, around the turn of the 1900s. His ideas were starting to get out there, but now this shift to this. So homosexuality was going to be treated as a medical issue, and so some of the treatment that went on and this is where you start, where some of the kind of the cultural perceptions of what conversion therapy is now, even though it wasn't called that at the time. Some of these things are still what people conjure up in their minds when they hear that term, though. Some of this medical treatment involved, say, electroshock. This would involve either shocks on the outside of the brain or even electrodes on the inside. There were testicular transplantation. So there was some thought that the homosexuality, the homosexual urges were located in the testes. And so you remove the testes and you actually transplant heterosexual testes on this. Yeah. There's some serious stuff here. And they also had lobotomies. So this involved severing connections to the prefrontal cortex of your brain. And all this was to treat the medical issue of homosexuality.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to keep in mind that this is being treated not primarily as a moral kind of religious thing that requires conversion. This is a medical thing that requires treatment. Later on, things develop and you get into what was called aversion therapy. So basically, to me, basically, here psychologists would try to associate your homosexual urges with negative consequences.
So it's like the opposite of the Pavlov dog thing. Instead of the reward coming with the bell, when you're experience the homosexual urges, you get pain or something equivalent.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that opposite effect of, so then every time you have some connection to that homosexual urge, you associate it with the negative.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this might involve, so, if the patient, may expose the patient to, say, homoerotic or homosexual pornography, and at the same time, shock them in some way, sometimes even shocking the genitals. And sometimes this involved giving drugs to induce vomiting. So it is really trying to just, like I said, aversion therapy, I think, is a good term, because it really is to try to turn you off. So every time you think of that, this is what you're thinking of in association with it.
And I'm sure we've all experienced some form of that, not induced this way, but like when you're sick and you eat something, you have a hard time with that food. Your mind makes that connection, whether you intend it to or not.
Yeah.
And so the concept works.
Oh yeah.
It's a horrible implementation of it, but it works.
Yeah. It's a negative reward feedback kind of idea. So yeah, I don't think that concept is new, but here they're applying it to homosexuality, which is, like I said, a medical treatment or a medical issue. In fact, it's in 1952, homosexuality is added as a mental disorder to the first DSM. And so again, DSM I think is important. If you're not familiar with it, this is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And this is put out by the American Psychological Association, though I've also seen it might be the American Psychiatrists Association. But basically this is kind of the handbook or the Bible of mental disorders for this professional organization. So this is in 1952 that this is put into the first edition of that book.
Right.
But then it's not long after that things start to change. In the 60s and the 70s are really just is the time of the sexual revolution. And so the kind of the libertarian or libertine approach to sexuality is just spreading across everywhere, from heterosexual to homosexual. Like everything is free game now. And so under that pressure, that cultural pressure, in 1973, the APA, or the American Psychological Association, removes homosexuality from the DSM. So in just the span of 20 years, following on the heels of cultural change, they changed their updated scientific handbook.
Really a short amount of time, 20 years to go from never having it listed that way prior, putting it in and listing it as a mental health or mental disorder, to saying, never mind. Yeah.
And the point, I think it's important to point out that the APA is meant to be like a scientific body.
Yeah.
And the DSM is kind of their scientific standard. And much of the change, or the removal of the homosexuality from the DSM was a lot to do with kind of societal pressure, not scientific discovery. It's worth noting as well that So it was removed in 73. It's in 69 that we get the kind of the famous Stonewall Inn raids in New York. They take place in June 1969, which is why Pride Month is in June. So this involved a raid of the New York police into known as an area known for gay gatherings, and so that became kind of a cultural touchstone for further change as far as how society approached some of these issues on sexuality and their acceptance. So you're starting to see in the 70s, you see kind of the APA, and the scientific and psychology field kind of moving away from viewing homosexuality as a medical issue. It just now it becomes treated as a normal development of human sexuality.
Yeah,
it's just another kind of on the spectrum. And so this is where kind of you start seeing religious organizations start to fill in the gap. I think you also see a lot of religious involvement in the political and cultural scene rising up in the States at this time as well. Get lost a sidetrack. You get things like the moral majority. You get like Pat Robertson starting to poke up around now. So you get Christian evangelicals really getting involved in the political scene.
Right.
And so I think this is perhaps feeds into this, but it's around this time that, as the quote, the medical professionals are leaving and not seeing homosexuality as a medical thing. Well, Christians are still seeing this as a moral thing. And so they're going to still treat it as well. But from their religious perspective in many cases. And so this is where conversion therapy gets its name, because it's kind of tying in with the whole spiritual conversion that happens. That's right. Kind of the language that so many religious organizations and systems use. You have a spiritual conversion. And so here the idea is that you have kind of a sexual conversion. This is where you might find slogans like "Pray the gay away." Yeah, everything is kind of if you just did the right religious things, your homosexual desires would abate or become sidelined, or you'd be able to move past them. And it can't be said that this did not help some people. Some people find this helpful, but for many now today, we just see this as one long continuous spectrum. It's all in the same category. So when we talk about conversion therapy, we're in people's minds now, in the kind of the cultural imagination. Conversion therapy includes everything from lobotomies and testicular transplantation all the way up to pray the gay away. That's all kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
Like, surely you can see the difference between these, even if you disagree with it all entirely. There's something different between chopping someone's brain and praying with them, even if it's the most aggressive religious treatment possible. Like there's something different between in these, but nonetheless, they're often grouped together in the cultural mind as the same thing, and they kind of group them together because they all involve ideas of shame and guilt. That homosexuality is a sin that should be avoided. Yeah. And this is an unnatural thing. And so because all of them can be grouped that way, it's all viewed as kind of under this umbrella of conversion therapy. But it's far from the case when you actually look at how it's treated now. And this is where, like I said before, with the conversion therapy law or conversion therapy ban, this is all outlawed no matter what, because it's all been grouped under this umbrella now.
Right.
But I think as we move into kind of how this is treated now, in many cases, especially in the kind of in the psychological field, at least by those who still are brave enough to treat it in a non-affirming way. Yeah. Or at least to look, not to immediately go to the affirming stage right away. It's important to understand that that's completely different from what those other pictures are. We have to move on, move past that image, and hopefully understand it a little bit better of what's actually being going on when we treat the mind. So remember, when we're talking about gender identity dysphoria or disorder or dysphoria, you have two treatments to get things in line, because the issue is my perception of myself doesn't match my physical self. So one has to change over the other to kind of become congruent with one another. The government has outlawed changing the mind, so the body has to be altered to fix the mind. What we're going to look at is how the mind is able to be fixed, and for some reason, this is dangerous. This is harmful. Harmful even to talk about. Like, part of the bill that banned conversion therapy also made it a criminal offense to advertise or promote, quote, conversion therapy.
Yeah.
Well, you can get fined or put in jail for 2 years just for advertising or promoting this. This fixing the mind. But think about this. We mentioned that gender dysphoria is not dramatic, or is not different. It's analogical to, say, anorexia, where your perception of you, where someone has a perception that they are oversized or overweight, when in fact they could be thin as a rail.
So their mind isn't matching up with their body.
That's right.
The mind is perceiving them as needing to lose weight, but the body is not
clearly
in line with that perspective.
And yet the treatment there is to fix their mind. You don't send someone who has anorexia for liposuction.
Yeah.
That's just not how you treat it. And so gender identity, I think, needs to be treated in that same way. So like I said, this isn't radical stuff. There's other treatment. There's other mental disorders that are treated in very similar ways already. And so gender identity, I think, and this is according to Paul McHugh, who's been in this field since the 1970s. He actually ran the gender identity clinic at Johns Hopkins, which is where Dr. John Money was.
Yeah.
Paul McHugh shut it down in the 70s after not finding any evidence that it was actually improving people's outcomes.
Right.
Going through the changes. But now he's kind of become kind of a pariah because of his views today. And I think the gender clinic has been reopened recently within the last 10, 15 years. But anyways, he says that gender identity issues should, quote, strive to correct the false problematic nature of the assumptions and to resolve the psychological conflicts promoting it. So in other words, correct the false beliefs and the things that are causing those false beliefs. Yeah. I don't think this is radical
shouldn't be
thinking here. No. But yet, tragically, so many, like, this kids society, or the kids are just inundated with this affirming language of, okay, you think you are a girl, but you're biologically a boy, but we'll affirm your gender identity, and the consequences of that going long term, we've already looked at the stats. It's still, even after transgender surgery and hormones, you still see a suicide rate of 19 times, or a suicide or death by suicide rate of 19 times that of the general population in the transgender, even after treatment. So clearly this isn't solving the issue. All right. So what are some of these issues? What are some of these factors that go into gender identity incongruence? And I'm going to go through four different factors here. And this comes from the work of Dr. Kenneth Zucker. He actually led the group that wrote the DSM entry on gender dysphoria. And he ran the Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto for 30 years and directed the Gender Identity Clinic. So he's been in this field, I think later on it says, for 40 years. Yeah. He literally wrote the book, or at least the entry in the Bible of this field on this issue. Yeah. And so he's treated these issues for a while. And so he lists out four things that he kind of looks at when he's treating children. I think it's important that this is primarily when it comes to children. Zucker actually is okay with allowing adults to go through with gender affirming surgery or sex reassignment surgery if they want to. He says that might even actually help them.
But takes issue with the affirmation among children.
It's with kids that he kind of looks at these. So first is biological predisposing factors. So here, think of the temperaments of boys and girls, and immediately any reasonable person says that there is difference on a general statistical basis. This is important to keep in mind. I'm talking in generalities, that boys and girls are different.
The way they play, the way they interact with each other is different. I have all girls, and the way my girls play is dramatically different than a friend who has all boys. Yeah. It's just that's instinctive to them in some way to be different.
So oftentimes what ends up happening now is that when a young boy doesn't like kind of the roughhouse playing that he probably sees so many of his peers engaging in, at such young ages, he may associate this kind of temperamental difference with a sex difference or a gender difference.
Yeah.
So I don't like playing football over here with Bobby. I like playing or like coloring and drawing over here, or playing or making crafts over here with Sally.
So must be meant to be a girl, not a boy.
Yes. So we're thinking kids from like up to 12. This is, I think, the age range he's kind of thinking of. So they have very simplistic thinking when it comes to these issues. And it's not surprising. We'll get into the next one, but they're the next factor in a second here. But they associate behavior with maleness and femaleness. So What is it to be a male? Well, if a child answers at a young age, it's going to be, well, a male does this and does this and does this.
Yeah.
Well, if I do that and that makes me a male. But if I don't, then I'm going to be a female. So they associate behavior more than having a more nuanced approach to it. But so for an example of this kind of temperamental factor, Zucker. Again, I'm going through this book, When Harry Became Sally. Again, this contraband in Canada. But he kind of relates his clinical work with these kids or kids in these situations. And in this book, he writes that one such boy was Frank, and he's talking about a boy that has this temperamental difference, who met this diagnostic criteria of gender identity disorder when he brought to the clinic at age 7. And so here's Zucker's comment on this. It says, in contrast to his two brothers, Frank was described by his parents as more sensitive and emotional. He had a long history of an avoidance of rough and tumble play, complaining that other boys were both mean and aggressive. Indeed, one of his brothers, who had a history of severe disruptive behavior, had often been mean and aggressive towards him. The problematic relationship with his brother appeared to generalize to Frank's view of all boys, as he complained that all boys were mean. He affiliated primarily with girls and with them engaged in a variety of stereotypical feminine activities. By age 5, he began to voice the wish to be a girl, stating that if he were a girl, then all of his problems would be solved. Like you can see, hopefully you can see the rationality here of the thinking of a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
Like in the 5-year-old's world, this makes perfect sense. If I'm this, look at all the troubles I'm having if I do this. I'm going to go over here. These boys aren't bothering this girl over here. I'm going to be over here.
Yeah.
I'm going to be this person. This is a girl. So I'll be a girl. You can see the rationality behind that. And yet so many now, when there's a more, if you will, feminine or more sensitive man or boy, the immediate tendency now today is to think, oh, he might be a girl.
Yeah.
Or a tomboy. That used to be a girl who is on the more aggressive side of things, more in line with what you would see with typical.
But now you can't have that tomboy kind of girl because they must be meant to be or actually be a boy. there is no more masculine girl or more feminine boy.
Yep.
There is a boy who is actually a girl or a girl who is actually a boy.
Yeah. So it actually, in many ways, the kind of the transgender ideology has a much firmer stereotypical approach to male and femaleness than what has generally been viewed. Or I shouldn't say in general, but how a lot of people understand what males or the kind of the temperamental range of a male or a female.
Yeah.
Like you can have tomboys, girls who are tomboys and still them be girls. But yet on the transgender ideology, no, really a tomboy is likely to be just a boy.
Yeah.
That's their thinking. So you have these kind of biological factors. The second one is social cognition. And so, as I was mentioning before, until ages between 5 and 7, again, this is according to Dr. Zucker, most children conflate being male and female with certain behaviors. And so, in fact, you can kind of see this in many cases when your children are playing. You know, how does your daughter pretend to play mom? He picks up the baby doll.
Yeah, the behaviors, the actions.
Yeah, right.
And if they're going to pretend to be the man of the house, they're going to be more of the tough behavior.
Yep. But when there's a delay in this kind of in developing a more nuanced approach, where again, we're not all men have to act in this way. That's a more nuanced approach. But if a child lacks that development or lags in that development, you'll see them still associate behavior with gender, with sex.
Yeah.
And so again, here's another example from Zucker's clinic. And so he says that when asked why he wanted to be a girl, one 7-year-old boy said that he said it was because he did not like to sweat and only boys sweat. He also commented that he wanted to be a girl because he liked to read and girls read better than boys. An 8-year-old boy commented that girls are treated better than boys by their parents and that the teacher only yells at the boys. His view was that if he was a girl, then his parents would be nicer to him and that he would get into less trouble at school. One 5-year-old boy talked about having a girl's brain because he only liked Barbie dolls. In this particular boy's treatment, he created drawings of his own brain, writing in examples of what his brain more like a girl's brain, and what his brain more like and what made his brain more like a boy's brain. E.g., when he developed an interest in Lego. Over time, the drawings of the size of the girl's brain shrunk and the size of the boy's brain expanded. So here again, you're associating this is what happens when children are slow to develop a more nuanced approach of what male and femaleness is.
Yeah.
They'll want to be the opposite or think they are the opposite because of one way the other girls are being treated or the boys are being treated, and I want to be treated like that.
Yeah.
So I'll be that. Again, very reasonable for an 8-year-old.
Yeah. Seems to make sense in that mind.
The third kind of underlying issue here is co-occurring pathology. So other mental issues or disorders that might be present. And in particular, Dr. Zucker points to autism, particularly kind of high functioning obsessive tendencies that come with autism.
Right.
Where they kind of just get locked on and focused on one thing, and that just becomes everything.
Yeah.
And so Zucker mentions that children with gender identity disorder generally show intense, if not obsessional, interest in cross-gender activities, and that both GID, gender identity disorder, and autism spectrum disorder, quote, involve a disposition for obsessional or focused interest and extreme rigidity in thinking. So like I said, they're inflexible in what they're processing, and so they just get locked in on, if someone with autism, all of a sudden gets attracted to, or an autistic boy gets attracted to Barbie dolls, the parents might think, oh, okay, what's that all about? Yeah. And in today's culture, maybe that means that he's actually a boy in there.
A girl.
Or sorry, a girl, yeah. So here's another example from Zucker. He says that they illustrate the co-occurrence of gender identity disorder and autism spectrum disorder with the case of David, aged 5, who had previously exhibited a variety of obsessional interests. His parents had tried to ignore his fixations, but when he became obsessed with the idea of being a girl, they bought girls' toys for him and let him wear his mother's clothes regularly. At school, when boys and girls lined up separately, he joined the girls' line. Then, while the assessment was in progress, David's mother reported that his obsessiveness had found a new focus. He now thinks that he is a computer. She considered this a preferable sort of obsession. By the time David was 12, the symptoms of gender dysphoria had disappeared, though now he was obsessed with heavy metal rock stars and trying to emulate them in appearance. So it's these phases that kind of go through. And again, these are kind of underlying conditions that often are missed now, because really the only diagnosis has to be to affirm this person's gender identity. And how do you assess that when the person's 5 or 6 or 7? Okay, well, what's he doing? Well, he's spending all his time playing with Barbie dolls.
You become obsessive with the idea of becoming a girl or being a girl. And now the idea is, well, then that must be what they are. And then you proceed down that path.
Yeah.
Instead of realizing that this is another issue, something like autism spectrum disorder, and they're becoming very obsessive with whatever caught their attention at that time. And it becomes the focus until moving on to a new thing.
Yeah. Yeah. But none of this can be really taken into account, like these underlying issues. And then the fourth one is family dynamics. So again, there's a story in here about a boy who experiences of the loss of his mother's attention after the newborn sister comes in.
Right.
Now, the mother herself is as in the book is described as being narcissistic, and the dad is largely absent. Now, kind of along with these kind of family dynamics, the Zucker's students, it says, found that about 3/4 of young boys with gender identity disorder had an insecure attachment relationship to their mother, and unpublished data suggest a similar percentage for girls. Zucker also reports that approximately half the mothers with GID had 2 or more diagnoses mothers of boys with GID. Mothers with boys with GID had 2 or more diagnoses of mental disorder, and about a quarter had at least 3 such diagnoses. So family dynamics plays a huge role in this.
Right.
It would seem. And even the mental health of particularly the mother, it would seem in this case, plays a significant factor in kind of the mental well-being and gender perceptions of the children.
Yeah.
Another kind of aspect is family trauma or abuse that takes place. And here, this example is particularly poignant. I think it really drives home the point that when you're dealing with people with gender identity disorder or gender dysphoria, you have to look at the underlying issues.
Yeah.
Because this is something that if you miss this just festers there. So here's this from Zucker's cases. It says, during the assessment, Rose commented that she wanted to be a boy because boys were stronger than girls. She told her adopted mother that when she walked down the street together, that her mother needed not to be afraid because, quote, "I look like a boy and no one will hurt you." Rose acknowledged that she has had the recurring thought that had she been a boy, then she would have been able to protect her mother from the boyfriend because the boys are stronger than girls. This is in the context of when it says, when she was 4 years old, Rose found her mother's body at the bottom of a staircase. She'd been murdered by her boyfriend, and with no biological relatives who could take care of her, Rose was adopted at the age of 6.
Wow.
So just think about that, with the mental trauma that puts in there. And now when she's talking about, don't worry, I'll protect you, I'm a boy. you understand why that's
Yeah.
there. And if you just treat the kind of the superficial presentation of it, you're going to miss all these kind of underlying issues that really need to be addressed.
Yeah.
And I put all these in there because these are developing false beliefs. These are the things that are causing those false beliefs. As Dr. Paul McHugh mentions at the beginning, the gender identity treatment needs to look at the assumptions that these patients have in their mind.
Yeah.
Just like people with anorexia, and you have to look at the as he says, the psychological conflicts provoking it. So looking at the kind of the biological predisposing factors, so the temperaments, the social cognition, whether or not the children are developing proper nuanced views of what it means to be a man or man or female, or male or female. Looking at underlying pathologies, autism being one, and then family dynamics, the health of the parents, and also any family trauma or abuse that might cause disruptions in the mental framework of a child. Like, all these things would seem to be obvious places to look, and to at least ask questions about, assess. But if you start digging into this, even asking these questions like why, you're already undercutting the validity of one's gender identity disorder, or one's gender identity, I should say.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's illegal.
Yeah.
So how Zucker kind of treats this is he basically, this is probably what's commonly referred to as talk therapy, or simply why therapy. It's you're asking the patient to talk about why they think the way they do.
Right. Yeah.
And I've seen some recent comments about from Jordan Peterson is like no psychologist should affirm their patient right away.
Yeah.
You're there to understand, to unpack, to wrestle, to try to understand why this patient has come to you, because they've probably wrestled with this stuff for years, and now they're finally coming to you. So don't just affirm them in what they already know.
Yeah.
Get to know why they are that way. So he what Zucker would go through, and this again comes from 4 decades of treating children with gender identity disorders. He would go through weekly play psychology or psychotherapy with a child. And here the goal was to get to the bottom of why the children thought the way they did, uncover these underlying issues that we just kind of talked about. The other one was to have weekly counseling sessions with the parents. As we looked at as we mentioned with the family dynamics, the tendency of the mother to have her own mental issues that need to be addressed looks very high.
Yeah.
And so those need to be addressed from the parent side for the child to be corrected as well. The other thing is also to kind of the third element was to have parent guided interventions. And so this here, a lot of it was to create appropriate limits for cross-gender behavior. So many stories now, especially the ones that hit the news, are from parents that once their child at age 5 says that, I am a boy or a girl, the opposite of their biology, immediately start to affirm the child.
They just immediately run with it.
Yeah.
They swap clothes, they swap toys, they swap everything and just run with it.
And that's part of the treatment. That's the social, what is it called? The social transition.
Right.
Where you start calling them by a different name. They start wearing different clothes. They begin presenting as the opposite sex, opposite gender. And yet here, part of the treatment here, understanding that there's probably underlying issues that need to be addressed, is to put appropriate limits on some of these cross-gender behavior. And so again, this is to be a balance. And I think in the book he says that calling a gender dysphoric girl by male pronouns may be counterproductive, but so can forcing her to wear dresses. So this isn't about, forcing Sally, who thinks she's a boy, into the girl stereotype. That's in fact exactly not what you're really.
But it's saying you don't go in the opposite direction either and say, well, let's just make her a boy.
Yeah.
You don't just run with it.
Yeah. Understand that girls can have a wide variety of temperamental range.
Yeah.
And if your child is having some sort of gender dysphoric experience, just forcing them into kind of the stereotypical girl or boy, that's not the treatment that's going on here.
No.
And that would seem to be kind of go against what a lot of people think about gender dysphoria, gender or conversion therapy.
Yeah.
That's just not what's going on. There's in fact a recognition that men or that girls and boys have a wide range of behavioral abilities. And then the other thing that he mentions is that that would be helpful in these parent guided interventions is actually developing same-sex relationships with children of similar temperaments and
Right.
interests. So go find other boys that have a little more, sensitive side, who like the more artistic expression of things.
Yeah.
And understand that you can be a boy who's artistic and you don't have to be
Yeah.
a boy who wants to go around pulling heads off of Barbie dolls. Like, you can actually be a boy and be both of those things.
Yes.
And putting kids in peer groups where they have those examples is important to flushing out a broader, more nuanced understanding of all the different ways that boys and girls can actually act and still be biological boys and girls.
Yeah.
And then he does also mention that that the use of medication is sometimes required, but this is more aimed at fixing the underlying issues and not necessarily the dysphoria itself.
Right.
Usually the dysphoria comes out of these underlying issues.
Yeah.
And so hopefully understanding some of the underlying issues and the treatment that takes place is far from what I think most people think of as conversion therapy.
Yeah. If you want to talk about a ban on electroshock therapy for it, I'm all on board. Absolutely. Yeah. I don't think that's a safe and effective way to deal with this. Mm-hmm. But when you're going to group that in with having a psychologist talk through underlying issues in a child, you have to acknowledge the difference. You have to acknowledge that there is a dramatic difference between forcing somebody into some questionable treatment and talking to them about it to try to determine what's actually going on. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Without recognizing that, you're taking a dangerous path to broad banning of all things.
Yeah. And I can't help but note kind of the similarities. If we're going to compare, those old-fashioned notions of quote conversion therapy of testicular transplantations and lobotomies, it's hard for me not to draw parallels to what gender affirming surgeries do.
Yeah, what we used to do to try to treat the homosexual or the transgender is now the same type of category that we're doing to affirm the transgender.
Yeah, it's the fact that we've got to the point where the only process is towards the direction of providing the puberty blockers that prevent natural physical development, that we are providing the only treatment now for a gender dysphoric person is to basically castrate them with cross-sex hormones. Mm-hmm. That then we give them the option of surgical removal of healthy body parts.
Yeah.
To me, that sounds more like the old-fashioned conversion therapy
yeah.
than it does with what has now been banned of this more talk therapy. Let's discover why you think the way you think, and let's maybe fix those underlying causes to these disruptions in your mental framework.
Yeah.
Like this isn't this conversion therapy as it's been banned or as it's been framed is not the scary thing. To me, it's this whole Orwellian gender affirming therapy and the irreversible changes those cause to people.
Yeah.
And yet the stats show that it does not produce the positive outcomes that it's touted to, especially in the long term. Mm-hmm. And that should not be a surprise if there are underlying issues.
Yeah, if you're dealing with underlying mental health issues that are causing you to think that way, changing your physical body is not going to treat those those issues, those problems you are having that is affecting your mind.
Yeah.
So of course you're going to wind up in the long run still having some sense of not fitting your body or not fitting your mind or just not being right.
Yeah. So just to kind of close the book on this, it's worth noting that Zucker was fired because he was not fully on board. This is in 2015. So he ran that clinic for about 30 years. And in 2015, because he not actually, you know what first got him in trouble was he published the Swedish study in a journal that he ran that pointed to the fact that that transgender, or that those who have gone through transgender treatment have not fared better. So it's that stat that we keep pointing out, that it's 19 times more likely to die by suicide as a transgender even after surgery than the general population. That's part of a report that was in Zucker's journal, got him in trouble. That got him in trouble because he would not would not retract it.
Yeah,
that got his attention, and then the fact that he does not immediately jump to gender affirming therapy right off the hop, got even more in hot water. And so, finally, from an article from the New York Magazine, it says that according to an influential strain of trans politics, Zucker's more nuanced why-focused method is offensive. That sounds like a caricature, but right there in the external review that helped get him fired and his clinic shuttered, 2 professional psychiatrists state that asking why is improper. What needs to be done is to accept the child for who they are, and anything less than that is ignorant, if not bigoted.
That just goes against everything that psychology has been for its entire history. The whole function of psychology is to understand the why.
Is to get to the bottom.
Get to the bottom of what the person is thinking, why they are thinking that, and what we can do to help them.
Yes. Yeah. It's oftentimes, I think, I was listening to our podcast and kind of the analogy is that the psychologist is kind of, and the psychiatrist is the person that helps you turn on the lights in that dark basement.
Yeah.
You know, even now, like it just is this weird psychological phenomenon, like turning off lights in the basement and walking upstairs. A lot of people have these weird thoughts of like, oh, now what's in the dark? The same thing kind of happens in the mind. There are some dark places that your consciousness won't allow you to go, and you need help to kind of walk you into that darkness, turn some lights on, scare away whatever it might needs to be, in order for you to really to kind of unpack some of this stuff.
Yeah.
And for so many children with gender dysphoria, there is unpacking that's required. Yeah. And yet psychologists are not allowed to do that. And so as a result, we mutilate bodies irreparably and leave them with these dark recesses of their mind, still poisoning the rest of it.
Yeah.
And so it's not surprised that we don't see this gender affirming treatment do all the good and wonders that it's claimed to do. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that I think is a worthy exploration and kind of clarity when it comes to this whole notion of conversion therapy, and hopefully it's kind of brought some light and clear and understanding to what is often used as this scare term.
Yeah.
And really it shouldn't be. But yeah, it's for me it's been helpful to get a better handle on some of these issues. Even for me, I wasn't sure what this conversion therapy or what the other side of the treatment was. This I can really wrap my head around the rationality of how a child gets that thinking and why the psychologist might want to be digging into that underlying issues.
Yeah.
All right. So with that wraps up the show. I think though, we do, if you've made it this far, thank you. We know you are one of the dedicated few.
Yeah.
And so we've saved this news for you. And I'll just let you do the talking then.
Sure.
Or not.
I'm signing off for the last time. I will no longer be doing the podcast anymore. I'm moving away. The family's moving out of province, and this is it. I've enjoyed this. It's been fun. It's gotten over all sorts of controversial topics and other fun stuff. So it's just been a good time.
Yeah, no, I've appreciated having you here and being bold enough to step into some of this water. Yeah, there isn't very many people who would even just sit across the table in many of these conversations. But no, it's been a fun ride these last 8 months now.
Yeah, we started in October. So
yeah, so this is episode 35. So yeah, we'll see where the future goes as far as the show. But no, thank you for having the courage to step out into the public, even as limited as the panel public might be.
Yeah,
but nonetheless, it's been fun, and I appreciate you having the courage to come along.
Yep.
All right, so with that, we'll wrap up this show. Thank you for coming along. As always, leave your comments, good or bad. Engage with. I want you to engage with these topics. You know, you don't have to buy in with everything I've said or thought about. But I think these are thoughts and ideas that don't get enough public light and consideration. So hopefully, if nothing else, it's just giving you kind of a new angle, a new facet to consider on some of these issues. So in the meantime, my name is Brian Constantine.
And I'm Michael Rowland.
And this has been Penhold Talk Radio.